Okay, everyone, welcome this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're coming in from. If you're here live with us, an especially warm welcome, equally to those watching this after the fact or listening on the podcast. I'm Molly Rowan Leach. I am so delighted to be here with the incredible Pete and Lynn Lee, both of them equally amazing souls in the field of restorative justice. And I want to just quickly introduce them in a way that gives you the clarity of just the length and breadth of each of their commitment to this field before we get started. And we really want to save time for Pete and Lynn to have enough sharing time with you towards the end today. We go for an hour this week and we go for another hour next week, as you can see up here on the Padlet. You'll also see that there's resources there in that column. Those are there for you to use, to pass along, to share. Please do so. And certainly we'll make sure that if you have any questions to Pete or Lynn, that we'll connect you with them in a way that works for them. But I'd like to just say a few words about both of them. First of all, from the heart, I believe that these two people have dedicated so selflessly their lives and wisdom and humility and accessibility to this restorative justice field. What they've done here in Colorado as a part of a larger team and community of restorative justice practitioners and professionals is pave a pathway that is regarded as one of the United States elders of sorts, Colorado, that is, the Restorative Justice Coalition here, including policy and legislation and community work and advocacy, way showing in the fact that we can and should be utilizing these practices to support victim empowerment, which is part of the topic that we're going to look at with these two wonderful people today and next week. So Pete Lee, former senator and representative here in Colorado, also a very seasoned RJ practitioner and facilitator, which is incredible. He's sat in many circles of many various kinds. He's an author and co-author of current Colorado restorative justice legislation. He's a member of the Restorative Justice Coalition of Colorado since its inception. Lynn Lee is a long-term practitioner facilitator, including HRVOD, which is high risk victim offender dialogue. She's advisory and board member to multiple organizations serving different areas of restorative justice. And she's a member and counsel to the Restorative Justice Coalition of Colorado since its inception. And again, I can't emphasize more what a treat and honor it is really to have these two with us. In all heartfelt thanks to both of you, Lynn and Pete, for being willing to be here with us today, and also for all that you've done, giving of your life and your service to the people of this state and much beyond. I know, Pete, you've worked with a lot of different communities in the United States and across the sea in supporting their moving forward in legislative action and policy that is based in restorative justice principles and practices. So it's always an honor and pleasure to host you. And thanks to those of you that are here today. Looking forward to interacting with you as well. Today's topic, of course, is Colorado restorative justice, past, present, and future, and victim empowerment, Pete's vision for the future. So welcome to you both, Pete and Lynn. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Molly, very much. We both very much appreciate you organizing this event and inviting us to participate in it. When you were giving the introduction, you froze up on my screen a couple of times. So if I've got an unstable internet going on here, give me a signal and I can run into the other room, because Lynn's computer seems to have a better connection than mine. But just, give me a shout, a hand signal or something. So again, thanks very much for doing this and giving us an opportunity to talk about what we've been doing in Colorado and talking about our vision for the future. Lynn and I have been working in this field for 20 plus years, and really see it as the alternative to the punitive, retributive, incarceral system that dominates criminal legal systems across the nation and the world. So I want to begin with a couple of statements from two victims and an offender following their participation in restorative justice victim offender dialogues. Um, After meeting with the man who killed her 3-year-old baby in a drive-by shooting, Charlotta Evans said, I got all of my questions answered. I am completely satisfied. Now I can think about my son Kayson's life. Before, all I could think about was Kayson's death. Compelling, amazing statement from an offender in the Department of Corrections after meeting with his murder victim's mother. He said, I have never put myself in the victim's place, and hearing what she was forced to deal with made me feel the issues that my selfish behavior caused. I was uneasy, but the lasting impression of it made me want to live my life as a better person. And then from another mom whose son was killed in a drunk driving accident after a conference with the driver who had been released from prison. I came away with some feeling of understanding, completion, relief, and peace, like a huge boulder had been lifted from my chest. So when I read and hear these statements from offenders and victims of the most horrible crimes, I ask, why hasn't restorative justice moved from the margins to the mainstream in the criminal legal system? And understand, I come to this discussion from the perspective of a criminal defense attorney and a Wharton Business School trained executive who worked for two Fortune 500 companies. When, as a practicing lawyer, I saw clients who were stuck in the revolving door of jail and prisons, and knowing that 50% to 70% of inmates return to prison after release, I then applied my business perspective and asked or noted that this punitive, retributive, carceral model is not working. It's not fulfilling the aspiration of public safety, behavioral change, and justice. We need a new approach, I concluded. As Howard Zare urged in his definitive treatise on restorative justice, we have to change lenses and look at the criminal legal system from a different perspective. We need to be open to the possibilities, said Dr. Zare, of restorative justice. Albert Einstein told us very insightfully, no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. We need to see the world anew. The problem is crime and public safety, and unrepentant, responsible parties and traumatized victims. Our solution has been incarceration. When imprisonment doesn't solve the problem, our response from the same consciousness has been to get tougher on crime. So we double down. We build more prisons. We impose longer sentences. We eliminate judicial discretion, and we create mandatory minimum sentences, create free strike rules, and impose lengthy and onerous probation and parole terms, which result in revocations and reincarceration. In our unrelenting commitment to punitive and retributive justice, we have created a criminal justice system that, in my view, is far more criminal than just. We have created a system that is incomparable with incompatible with our constitutional commitment to form a more perfect union to establish justice and promote domestic tranquility. It's not news to this audience that these policies have created in the United States, in Colorado, and around the world an incarceration nation. With 5% of the world's population in the United States, 7 billion people in the world, 350 million in the United States. We have a quarter of the world's prisoners, over 2.3 million people. We measure incarceration by incarceration rates, how many people are in prison or jail per 100,000 of population. The US incarceration rate is 704. It's been as high as 780. The average for the world is 160. So 160 versus 700. So we incarcerate 4, 5, 6, 7 times as many people as democratic NATO allies, including England at 139, France at 102, Germany at 78, Italy 96, Greece 111, Canada 114. But even more than dictatorships such as China, which incarcerates at a rate of 118 compared to our 700, Libya, which is at 99, and Pakistan at 43. In addition, this system is unconscionably expensive. In Colorado, this year alone in our budget, we are going to increase the budget to $1 billion. Virginia Senator Jim Webb, when looking at these comparatively excessive incarceration rates around the world, said, we are either the most evil people in the world, or there is something fundamentally wrong with our criminal justice system. I choose to believe the latter. The futility of this mass incarceration is self-evident. 97% of inmates are released back into the communities from which they came. Only a small percentage, 2, 3, 4% of inmates are serving life sentence. But without adequate treatment for mental health, substance abuse, our punitive retributive system releases inmates who are unrepentant, unrehabilitated, and unprepared to return to our communities. As a result, we have unacceptably high recidivism rates. As I said, 50, 60, 70% of releasees return to prisons within 3 years. As a former business executive focused on efficiencies, bottom lines, and results, I can assure you that if we had a 50% product failure rate, we would adopt a different business model. I commend those figures to anyone who has worked in the business world. Compounding this systemic failure is the fact of disproportionate minority incarceration and its devastating impact on communities of color. I urge you to read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. I'm just rereading it again. It's an extraordinary treatise about mass incarceration and the impact that it has on minorities, particularly the war on drugs. In addition, dealing with kids, we know that when we suspend and expel kids from high schools, they're more likely to drop out, and kids who drop out are more prone to crime and incarceration. Yet we continue zero tolerance policies, refer kids to law enforcement for offenses which used to result in a trip to the principal's office. By resorting to suspensions and expulsions far too often, and because we rely so heavily on punishment rather than rehabilitation or restoration, the school to prison pipeline is surging. Having worked in both the criminal justice system and in the school, I concluded that we need to try something new. Restorative justice is that something new and different. Less new, certainly different. It looks at crimes and offenses from a different perspective. Restorative justice looks at harms and relationships and repairing them rather than strictly punishing offenders. By changing our consciousness, we can change the lens through which we look at offenses. By enabling victims, offenders, and community members to meet face to face, ask and answer questions in face to face dialogue, we empower them to reach understanding, repair relationships, change their stories, and participate in the setting of consequences. Victims can move from trauma induced feelings of fear, anger, and sometimes retribution to understanding and the beginning of healing, and in some cases, a sense of peace and grace. People who have committed offenses can take responsibility and be accountable for their actions. By meeting with and listening to the person who they have harmed, they can develop empathy, the beginning of transformation, and they can take tangible steps to repair the harm they've done to the victim and community. They can atone. Collectively, with restorative justice, we can form a more perfect union. We've been trying to see the world anew in Colorado, to change this trajectory of this incarceration juggernaut to move towards decarceration and restorative justice. And we have had some success. Remember, we as a society, by conscious policies, created this imbroglio of incarceration, and we can change it with conscious policies. So in Colorado, when I got elected to the legislature in 2010, we have enacted 9 major restorative justice bills. And as Molly alluded to, we have a robust legal framework in Colorado for restorative justice. Restorative justice is available for felonies, serious felonies, misdemeanors, municipal offenses, and petty offenses. It's available for juveniles and adults in schools and charter schools, in the Department of Corrections, and in the Department of Youth Services. We created significantly a 19-member Restorative Justice Coordinating Council representing all stakeholders. Under the leadership of a full-time Restorative Justice Coordinator, it serves as a focal point to promote, support, and educate people all over the state and country about restorative justice. In addition, in Colorado, we enacted a bill to set up a designated funding source for restorative justice. We imposed a $10 fee on every criminal case. It generates almost $1 million annually, which is dispensed by the State Restorative Justice Council. We provided in these bills multiple entry points for restorative justice so that a juvenile or adult can enter the restorative justice process at a number of times, early in the process, before plea, before sentencing, after sentencing, during probation, or even during parole. The Restorative Justice Council has also engaged with this money that they've been allocated in a grant writing process. They receive grants from local community RJ organizations, which enables, and they've provided up to $150,000 to local communities, one of which was to train facilitators and social workers in schools to replace SROs. Last year, we funded 7 other restorative justice programs across the state to, again, continue to build capacity. We've conducted some 20 victim offender dialogues in the Department of Corrections in maximum security prisons. We had a bill which implemented 4 pilot programs utilizing the New Zealand model of pre-filing diversion. So kids identified by the district attorney were diverted into restorative justice before charges were filed. Extraordinarily successful, It had a 95% success rate with some 800 and almost 900 kids involved. 95% attended a victim offender dialogue, reached agreement to repair the harm, and completed all the terms of the agreement. Their recidivism rate 3 years later was an astounding 8.2%. We've also, in Colorado, adopted confidentiality provisions in both the juvenile and in the adult system to ensure that people are encouraged to be candid in their pre-assessment suitability evaluation so that their charges cannot be filed against them for things they said within a conference unless it's a mandatory reporter situation. We also, in Colorado, to ensure we have quality, knowledgeable facilitators, adopted standards and standards of practice for facilitators and for high-risk victim offender dialogue facilitators. In addition, we have scores of schools across Colorado who are implementing restorative practices to keep kids in the schools and to create safer learning environments. So we've done quite a bit in Colorado. A couple of other things. We've adopted a definition of restorative justice. I think it's important if you're consider adopting restorative justice statutorily to have a definition of restorative justice. And we significantly expanded the use of restorative justice in diversion programs. Most states have diversion programs. Some permit restorative justice referrals and some don't. So that's an area with some possibilities to expand. And we also require our probation departments, when evaluating kids for terms of probation, to do a suitability assessment to determine if the kids are suitable for participation in restorative justice. So we're really proud of what we've done, but we need to do more. The question I keep asking is, how do we move restorative justice forward? How do we expand the use of restorative justice as the primary response to misconduct? How do we broaden the acceptance of restorative justice amongst sometimes reluctant prosecutors? There are tens of thousands of criminal and juvenile cases filed in Colorado, and restorative justice is not used in as many as we would like to be seen. In fact, in a small percentage. Going forward, I am of the opinion that the answers to all of these questions is the enactment of a Victim Empowerment Act, the creation in Colorado of a statutory right to restorative justice for every victim or survivor of a crime. I propose a draft summary of the concepts, and Molly has put those in the notes. I also provided a draft of a bill to create victim empowerment through restorative justice, and that multi-page bill is also in the notes. You're welcome to use that for whatever purposes. We know that crime survivors often experience severe, profound, and long-lasting trauma, including physical, emotional, and spiritual consequences, as well as economic loss as a result of crimes. Restorative justice has been proven effective in helping victim survivors to begin the healing process, enabling them to get answers to questions that only the responsible party can provide. They can understand the factors that went into the responsible party asking that caused the responsible party to engage in that conduct. So as we expand the rights, let's empower victims to choose restorative justice. At this time, the decision to utilize restorative justice is primarily almost 100% within the discretion of the district attorney, who can decline or authorize restorative justice. My proposal is that we um, authorize victims to select restorative justice so that if they want to meet with their offender or with a surrogate for the offender, it can't be denied by the district attorney without good good cause. I propose that we add victim empowerment to the Victims' Rights Act in Colorado. It would require the victims be fully advised about how restorative justice works, what the possibilities are, what the challenges are, and um, to ensure that when victim offender dialogues are arranged for victims, that they're done with adherence to the standards that have been adopted by the Restorative Justice Council. The essence of this proposal is to elevate victim survivors to be equal participants, in the criminal legal system, along with the responsible party defendants and the prosecutors, empowering victims to elect to participate in restorative justice, in addition to enabling them to get answers to questions they couldn't otherwise get, enables them to begin this healing process to help them overcome the sense of alienation and estrangement that they often feel when they are in the system. My wife, Lynn, has been working um, a lot over the years with victims as a facilitator, particularly in high risk, high consequence crimes. And she and I discussed some of these conferences, the outcomes and the reactions of the participants in the conference. So I asked her to join me this morning because she can really give you better than I a sense of the impact that victim empowerment attending these conferences has on victims. So with that, let me ask Linda, talk about victim empowerment.
I would love to talk about victim empowerment. Also, I would love to have a conversation with all of you, or at least be able to answer your questions. So if you're comfortable and able and can turn on your video, that'd be great. Then I could feel like I was actually talking to people instead of names of people. So thank you. Oh, thank you. Hi. So I have been working in restorative justice for about 25 years. And now I spend all of my time, and I feel so fortunate to be able to do what I am calling high impact dialogue. So I've taken out the victim offender wording because I don't want to label anybody. I also, I was listening to Pete talk about trauma, and I think it's really important. To me, restorative justice is a human-centered process. So I'm working a lot in prisons, jails, in the community, and usually with cases where somebody has died as a result of a crime somebody's committed or experienced extreme harm. So what I have noticed in the last, I don't know how many years, is that all of the people that I'm working with, especially if they're incarcerated, have been victims and have experienced a lot of trauma themselves. So not to take away that something really horrible has happened to them or one of their family members, but I guess just to remind myself as I'm doing my work that a lot of the people that I'm working with, those identified as what maybe in the past we've called offenders, I call them responsible parties or someone who created harm, as well as the people that are harmed have experienced a lot of trauma. I just wanted to, I think before I describe a case I just completed last week, actually, I wanted to say that when I think about victim empowerment, systems like the criminal legal system, probation, parole, DOC, DYS, Department of Corrections, Department of Youth Corrections. If I'm using initials and you don't know what those mean, raise your hand. They've decided, the legal system has decided for victims that they know best. So they know what's best for victims. They don't allow victims to meet with people who've caused them harm if they don't feel like it's safe, if they don't feel like it's appropriate. That especially comes up for me in the context of sexual harm, domestic violence. And I really feel like it's important to honor victims, honor what they need, honor what they're asking for, and to try to help them get what they need as much as we possibly can. So that feels important to me to say. Last week, I had a high impact dialogue, and we had started working with these individuals, like I think at the end of January, and I always co-facilitate in high impact dialogue. So it's me and my co-facilitator. 3 young women had gone down to Mexico. They're all college students. So they had gone down to Mexico for a break and gone to a pharmacy to buy drugs. And one of their friends had asked if they would buy him Oxy. So they went into the pharmacy and bought the other drugs that they wanted, which were all, just available in the pharmacy, and then had to ask the pharmacist if he had any Oxy. So he went in the back and brought it out, and they paid for it and left. When they bought it, I think it was blue. I get sort of confused with the blue and green colors, but I think it was blue. And then they left and came home, and by the time they got home, it had turned color. So now it was green striped. The young man who asked for the Oxy was really anxious to get it, calling them when their plane landed, wanted to know when they could bring it over. So they brought it over to his apartment, told him that it had changed color. He might look that up on the internet or talk to somebody about why that might have happened. He did do that, and he took it anyway. 45 minutes later, he had passed away from a fentanyl overdose. And I am relating this conference to you because I feel like it's so timely. The mom of the young man who passed away really wanted to know, what were his last words? Was he happy? He was in college, so the family didn't see him as much as they had before when he was living at home, and those kinds of things. So she wanted to know all about her son. The other thing, right when we sat down, she said to the young lady who had given him the Oxy, I don't want people to forget about my son. And when she said that, that's what I think everybody wants. Every victim wants to know that their loved ones are not forgotten about. So we met in her home, which was really lovely. I always think restorative justice over a cup of tea is perfect, as opposed to a prison where I do some of my work. We met in her home, and they had the opportunity to ask. The mom was able to ask everything that she wanted to ask, understand what had been going on with her son. We had been working with them over a period of 3 months, so we had worked with them to be able to ask the questions they needed. In the case of the victim, say the things she felt were important for her to say. And in the case of the young lady who had the oxyfentanyl. How will you respond to these really difficult questions? So at the end of the dialogue, they decided that they wanted to present together. So the mom had already gotten a whole bunch of test strips and a whole bunch of Narcan that she was distributing, and she is planning on talking with groups of kids about drugs, fentanyl. So now they're going to present together, which I think is really lovely. So I wanted to relate that to you because that conference, so I do conferences all over the range of, pre-plea, pre-sentencing, post-sentencing, someone's been incarcerated for 30 years, all of that. So this case, she hasn't been charged yet. She might be charged. She could face a federal charge of drug distribution resulting in death, which holds a mandatory 20-year sentence in federal prison. And she's 21, maybe 22, maybe, young lady. So yeah, do you have any thoughts, questions, anything you'd like to ask me about that?
I'm also happy to help field questions in the chat if you feel moved to do it that way. We always honor voice choice in these spaces.
So while you're thinking about, Ron, do you have something? Yeah.
Yes, Lynn. Thank you for sharing on the story. It's very powerful. I wondered if the survivor and the person who's being charged, if they will have a continued relationship, or if you notice that there's a possibility of them having continued dialogue.
I'm sure they will have a continued relationship. The mom was really, really interested in that. Also, while we were meeting, she was asking the young lady, I want to have a birthday party or a party to celebrate my son's birthday. Would you come? Would you bring your friends? Would you bring his friends? Yes, we would love to do that, right? So they were making plans together. And I think, for the mom, that's like such a beautiful thing, right? She has all of these people who really cared about her son. And so, yeah, I'm sure they'll have more of a relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Most significantly, if I could add in, these people had a relationship. The young lady and the young man had been friends for a long time. They had grown up together. They had gone off to college together. They had been close friends. And mom knew the young man who bought the drugs or the young lady that bought the drugs that ended up killing her child. And she has expressed to Lynn, I think you told me, that she does not want to see this young lady go to prison for 20 years. She just doesn't think that's an appropriate outcome.
Yeah, she doesn't want her to be prosecuted. The young lady would say he was her best friend. So, Sharon, you had something?
Yes, thank you. And again, thank you for sharing all this, both of you. I'm just wondering what structures are in place that made it possible for this to happen. And then also, as a result of this circle, what structure is in place to prevent her from being incarcerated?
Well, that is a really great question. So I have in the last 2 or 3 years been working, I sit on the state council that Pete was talking about, the State Restorative Justice Council. And there's a public defender, a lady from the public defender's office who sits on the council as well. So she and I have been doing a lot of work together. I've been doing suitability assessments for defense attorneys. So that this case through her fence, go wherever, but they're at home and do a suitability assessment. Maybe we here have in the past called those pre-conferences, but it's really an assessment to determine if someone is appropriate for a restorative process. So that's how that case came to me. So she has a defense attorney. She has a really good defense attorney. And, you know, now I'm sort of wondering, I don't know this. So, you know, when somebody's in the legal system, and I'm not an attorney, but so these two people have decided that they're going to present together. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be limitations on them waiting for the case to move forward as to whether or not they can actually present together. I don't know the answer to that, but that's something I will talk with her attorney about. So the mom also, the family, mom, dad, brother, sister, had, we connected them, and this really frustrates me. So we had connected them with the legal system, with the DA and the DEA investigators. Nobody had ever contacted them. They knew there had been an investigation, but none of the family knew anything about the results of the investigation. So my co-facilitator found out who the DEA investigator was, and we connected him with the family, and they had a conversation about the results of the investigation. Now that mom of the young man who passed away is advocating for her to not be prosecuted. I don't know if, you know, sometimes the legal system doesn't really listen to victims, right? They don't, just because a victim describes something or says they'd like to see something happen doesn't mean that that's going to happen. So I don't know, but they are advocating for her to not be prosecuted. And I wonder if they start presenting together, you know, go out into the community, work with other kids, and, you know, will that make a difference? I don't know. Yeah.
Further questions. So do you have the structure in place so that, well, first I'm wondering, was this a repair harm circle? And then were agreements made? And is there a structure in place so that if she follows through on agreements that she would not be charged?
No, because it didn't come through the legal system. So most of the work I do in high impact dialogue doesn't come, you know, when we do community group conferencing or circles or something else, repair harm circles, then there will be an agreement. But most of the time in high impact dialogue, there's not an agreement. We could write an agreement. This mom was really not interested in forcing her to do anything. She wanted her to want to engage with her, right? So she's not even been charged, so there would be nobody to share an agreement with. So no agreement, and hardly ever in high impact dialogue is there an agreement. Because it's really about, you know, what were my loved one's last words? Why did this happen? What was behind that? You know, it's like they don't need that person to do something. They want to know about their loved one. That's been my experience.
Well, part of the idea behind victim empowerment is to give the victim more of a voice in the process. You know, clearly we can't circumscribe the authority of the district attorneys to make those prosecutorial decisions, but the goal is to at least elevate the voice of the victim to a point where it is statutorily required to be considered. And, you know, most district attorneys, when they are making their charging decisions, take into account the views, feelings, goals, and desires of victims. So we want to enshrine victims with the statutory right to participate.
Sharon, thinking about that question a little bit more. So if that mom would have asked me for a written agreement, if she would have said, can we agree to these things and can we put it in writing? I absolutely would have done that. Right. So I'm just really listening to them and what they're looking for and trying to accommodate that. But yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for, and just to further that, is there a system in place though, where that can happen and also help to bypass that person to be charged and become part of the incarceral system, do you have that?
Well, what is true about that? So I'm not sure if, a system in place, that's not exactly how it's working, but defense attorneys take those suitability assessments or those conferences and advocate for their clients in court. So I did have a case where a young man, this was during the Black Lives Matter protests. A bunch of protesters were on the highway. This young man, for whatever reason, I don't know, had taken a gun. He doesn't know. And a Jeep came onto the highway. He shot at the Jeep. He ended up hitting two people. Neither one passed away, but one was shot in the side of the face and the other one was shot in the leg. The victim who was shot in the leg wanted a restorative justice conference. So before he was sentenced, we held a conference, which was really amazing. And he ended up, because of his success in restorative justice, I think he got 4 years probation and he wasn't incarcerated, which, was also a possibility. So he got like 4 years of probation and some restitution that he has to pay for medical bills. So it can affect somebody's sentence, and I could describe other ways in which it's affected. I have another case right now that I'm going to conference in 2 weeks, and it's a family conference. It's a cousin who shot his other cousin, and he's paralyzed, and the young man with the gun could go to prison. I don't think that's going to happen. I think once he goes through what I consider a family group conference, once he goes through that conference, then I think, the lawyers will advocate in court for him, and the judge is already saying that he's not going to be incarcerated. So, if somebody is in the right frame of mind for a restorative justice process, it can make a difference. I really try to keep my work separate from the legal system. Like, I feel like it's not up to me. If somebody wanted me to go into court and, say that was somebody was successful in a restorative justice conference, I would definitely do that. Confidentiality is important, so I wouldn't violate that. But it's not my job to legally advocate for a client. It's my job to bring people together. So I really try to keep myself separate from the legal system and be really clear about what I'm there for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Molly, can you tell me what time it is?
Sure, we have 10 minutes, and of course, yeah, I want to defer to the group. There are other questions, so I do have a question myself, but
By
yeah.
all means, ask.
So one of the things that I'm very curious about myself, and I think others might be too, I can't speak for everybody else, but this stage of assessment, suitability assessment, and I'm wondering if you might be willing to talk just a little bit more about that stage, and what qualities are you observing, looking for, that would indicate to you and your co-facilitator that, it feels pretty good that we can move forward. I think it's important, personally, I feel this very strongly, for this field to hear from you on this piece, because there seems to be confusion about what it means to move forward. And, even I've witnessed confusion between facilitators themselves in what suitability means. Sometimes it's called accountability, right? But yeah, could you just talk to us about your wisdom and experience in that?
I think this piece is the most important piece. I think if we make mistakes in restorative justice, it's in determining suitability. So I think it has to happen every time. It doesn't matter what the level of offense is, even if it's graffiti on the side of a building. And in the past, I used to do those kinds of lower level cases. Suitability is everything. It's really, really, really important. So we're always looking for, what do they say that expresses remorse? Do they express remorse? Do they take accountability, and what are they taking accountability for? Are they willing to do something to repair harm? Those are the three, those things have to be there. I don't need total accountability. I can live with accountability for a piece of it, and then we can work towards more if that needs to happen. I just went into a jail north of here and did a suitability assessment with a young man. And I usually start with, would you like me to describe restorative justice first, or would you like to tell me what happened? So he, when they do this, is like, oh, this is great. So he didn't even give me time to say anything else. He just started talking, and he talked for an hour, probably 45 minutes, an hour, about exactly what had happened, and went through detail after detail after detail after. That is so easy for me, because he just told me all of those things, right? I know he's appropriate. If there's something I have a question about, a question I will ask, when I'm sort of wrapping up, is, who do you think was harmed? And if they can name all the people that were harmed, that's really fabulous. There's always more than one, themselves included, because he's sitting in jail. So I think, establishing that they are remorseful, and sometimes that is a matter of us asking the right questions, like, how do you feel about what happened? What would you do if you were put in that situation again? Looking for ways to understand remorse. And the guy I just described to you, I didn't have to ask any of that. It was really clear. Accountability, he was totally accountable. I don't even usually have the police reports for these kinds of cases, and I don't really need them. I do with lower level cases, but I don't need them with these cases. He was totally accountable. He would do anything to fix it. It's really hard. It is really hard to go through the process of talking to me and my co-facilitator for months and bringing back up something that was really difficult, probably one of the worst moments in their lives, for both people, for the survivor as well as the person who created harm. And then actually sitting down with the relative of that person that you killed, or actually sitting down with that person that you harmed. It's really hard. I've had incarcerated guys say, through their tears and sobbing, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. So I think suitability is really, really, really important. When I'm doing assessments for defense attorneys, the lady I'm working with on the state council, who is a defense attorney herself, has already talked to the defense attorney. So she knows what we're looking for, and she relates that to them. So I have not yet done a suitability assessment that didn't, where the client wasn't appropriate. They've all been appropriate, maybe on a continuum, but they've all been appropriate.
And it links directly into victim empowerment too, this
Yes.
stage.
I feel really, really, really strongly. I don't want to sit a victim down with somebody who's going to re-victimize them. That's my job to make sure that that's not going to happen. So if that takes me, if I have to do 3 suitability assessments, if I have to work with them for 3 months to figure out if that's going to happen or not happen, I'm willing to do that. Molly, does that answer your question?
Very much so. Thank you so much. There's just one little tidbit that I really am wanting to ask, and that's about mental health and addiction. When it enters the room at that stage, do we have planned practices to like cross-refer or to bring somebody back again after a certain stage of support systems that may be identified as needed? Or is that even our job as restorative justice facilitators?
Well,
Because we're not mental health professionals, right? But we
right.
see
So I'm not
addiction
going to
and
do that
trauma.
myself, but I
Right.
have been referring people to trauma therapists.
Uh-huh.
I would, that feels more important to me than the addiction piece because it's more about why they are addicted, right? So a couple things come up when you say that. So I have a conference this week, and this guy has a history of using. And I've talked to the co-facilitator. So if he walks into the room high, we're not going to hold the conference, right? Would we do it another time? Sure. Sure. I'd go back and do it if he were sober. No, I don't want to address addiction. I'm not a drug and alcohol counselor. No. I mean, I know a lot about trauma, but I would prefer to refer them to a trauma therapist if they want. Not my job to tell them they have to go through therapy or talk to anybody. It's up to them. So yeah, I think mental health is pretty huge, actually. I think the trauma piece with all of the people that I work with comes into play. So yeah, really important, I think, for us to be, I almost hesitate to say trauma informed because I think that term is so overused. But I think it's really important for us to understand trauma, how it might show up, have people that we can refer to someone to if they're interested. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you. And Pete, did you have something you wanted to add? I saw you unmute, so I wanted to just give you that chance.
No, not at all. When we wrote those restorative justice bills, we put suitability as a prerequisite in the bills so that a probation officer or a facilitator would have criteria to determine if someone is suitable for participation. So in Colorado, those 3 elements that Lynn mentioned, acceptance of responsibility, some level of contrition, and the willingness to do something tangible to repair the harm are in the Colorado statutes. And they're critically important to ensure, one, that the responsible party is accepting of his responsibility and then will move forward, but also to ensure that the survivor victim is not re-traumatized by someone who has no regrets about what he did. And that's why restorative justice, I think, is so successful, is because you bring people together who are motivated to make change. In my world of the criminal legal system, the first thing lawyers tell their clients is plead not guilty. And so they come into it with that frame of I'm not guilty, I'm not responsible. It enables you to work out a plea bargain, but ultimately, a defendant is going to internalize that I'm not guilty syndrome and have a difficult time then going in front of a judge and accepting responsibility. So more to come in part 2.
More to come in part 2, and really appreciating everybody here today. If you're watching the recording, thank you for being here with us in that way. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place, for part 2 with Pete and Lynn Lee. And thank you so much for being with us, Pete and Lynn.
Our
Once
pleasure.
again.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you next week, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, bye now.